The Painted Veil by William Somerset Maugham. Chapter 1. She gave a startled cry. "What's the matter?" he asked. Notwithstanding the darkness of the shuttered room, he saw her face on a sudden distraught with terror. "Someone just tried the door." "Well, perhaps it was the Emma, or one of the boys. They never come at this time. They know I always sleep after tiffin." "Who else could it be?" "Walter," she whispered, her lips trembling. She pointed to his shoes. He tried to put them on, but his nervousness, for her alarm was affecting him, made him clumsy, and besides, they were on the tight side. With a faint gasp of impatience she gave him a shoehorn. She slipped into a kimono and in her bare feet went over to her dressing table. Her hair was shingled and with a comb she had repaired its disorder before he had laced his second shoe. She handed him his coat. "How shall I get out?" "You better wait a bit. I'll look out and see that it's all right. It can't possibly be Walter. He doesn't leave the laboratory till 5. "Who is it then?" They spoke in whispers now. She was quaking. It occurred to him that in an emergency she would lose her head, and on a sudden he felt angry with her. If it wasn't safe, why the devil had she said it was? She caught her breath and put her hand on his arm. He followed the direction of her glance. They stood facing the windows that led out on the veranda. They were shuttered and the shutters were bolted. They saw the white china knob of the handle slowly turn. They had heard no one walk along the veranda. It was terrifying to see that silent motion. A minute passed and there was no sound. Then, with the ghastliness of the supernatural, in the same stealthy, noiseless and horrifying manner, they saw the white china knob of the handle at the other window turn also. It was so frightening that Kitty, her nerves failing her, opened her mouth to scream, but, seeing what she was going to do, he swiftly put his hand over it and her cry was smothered in his fingers. Silence. She leaned against him, her knees shaking, and he was afraid she would faint. Frowning, his jaw set, he carried her to the bed and sat her down upon it. She was as white as the sheet, and notwithstanding his tan, his cheeks were pale too. He stood by her side looking with fascinated gaze at the china knob. They did not speak. Then he saw that she was crying. "For God's sake, don't do that," he whispered irritably. "If we're in for it, we're in for it. We shall just have to brazen it out." She looked for her handkerchief and knowing what she wanted, he gave her her bag. "Where's your toupee?" "I left it downstairs." "Oh, my God. I say, you must pull yourself together. It's 100 to 1 it wasn't Walter. Why on earth should he come back at this hour? He never does come home in the middle of the day, does he?" "Never. I'll bet you anything you like it was the Emma." She gave him the shadow of a smile. His rich, caressing voice reassured her and she took his hand and affectionately pressed it. He gave her a moment to collect herself. "Look here, we can't stay here forever," he said then. "Do you feel up to going out on the veranda and having a look?" "I don't think I can stand." "Have you got any brandy in here?" She shook her head. A frown for an instant darkened his brow. He was growing impatient. He did not quite know what to do. Suddenly she clutched his hand more tightly. "Suppose he's waiting there." He forced his lips to smile and his voice retained the gentle, persuasive tone, the effect of which he was so fully conscious of. "That's not very likely. Have a little pluck, Kitty. How can it possibly be your husband? If he'd come in and seen a strange toupee in the hall and come upstairs and found your room locked, surely he would have made some sort of row. It must have been one of the servants. Only a Chinese would turn a handle in that way." She did feel more herself now. "It's not very pleasant even if it was only the Emma. She can be squared and if necessary I'll put the fear of God into her. There are not many advantages in being a government official, but you may as well get what you can out of it." He must be right. She stood up and turning to him stretched out her arms. He took her in his and kissed her on the lips. It was such rapture that it was pain. She adored him. He released her and she went to the window. She slid back the bolt and opening the shutter a little looked out. There was not a soul. She slipped onto the veranda, looked into her husband's dressing room and then into her own sitting room. Both were empty. She went back to the bedroom and beckoned to him. Nobody. I believe the whole thing was an optical delusion. Don't laugh. I was terrified. Go into my sitting room and sit down. I'll put on my stockings and some shoes.